Today in the Hobby Bench, I'll be talking about travel for your Savage Worlds game. So I always look at the idea of travel and how to handle that, and the idea of maybe getting provisions and water and supplies and sort of gathering these things together for a big expedition. Likewise, for sometimes my characters, they say, hey, I want to be a ranger or something like that sort, or some type of survivalist, I can survive out in the wild and maybe hunt animals or be able to forage, something like that. And it sounds great. I'm thinking, oh, that'd be cool. We'll have that definitely be part of the game. And then, of course, once you start playing itself, then you realize, it just never comes up. There's so much details and things that are sort of involved with that and bookkeeping. You just decide, I don't really want to bother with that. I just want to go ahead and just play the game, maybe have these highlights, that kind of thing. I always feel it's really a little disappointing because I wanted to try to find something that could work. Unfortunately, I stumbled across this post from this old blog, Age of Ruins, and they had an absolutely wonderful way of keeping track of provisions and the idea of overland travel. And I sort of grabbed that and used that for my game. You'll find a link of that in the comments below. I'm also going to have a link to my blog post that talks about this in my Savage Worlds game. But the general idea is that when you make a journey, it's going to be based on a certain number of milestones, certain points on your travels where you're going to make a check. In addition to that, you're going to have levels of your supplies. You'll have 5 levels for your supply. They'll be full, high, sufficient, low, or out. In addition to that, you're going to have these different markers for these. You'll have 4 markers that you'll use to sort of represent an abstract way of your provisions and what you sort of have. When you're at full, you're fully stocked. Have all the provisions that you need. You've just started out your journey. When you're high, then you're going to use out 1 level of your provisions. You're still, well above what you need. When you're down to 2, at that point there, you're sufficient. You've got enough provisions to still make it through the trip. Of course, when you get down to low, you're going to have just 1 set of provisions there. And that means that, you're getting pretty low on supplies, but you can still get by with whatever you need. And of course, when you're out, that means that you have no markers left. You're completely absent of any provisions. The idea for a journey on that is that if you're, let's say, going to a location and returning, let's say we're going to go to some sort of dungeon or something like that, maybe on the edge of this lake, you're going to have 4 milestones total. Going to that location, maybe like half a day or so out of that, you're going to have 2 milestones. At that point in time that you're going to make some sort of check. And depending on what you draw in a card, that'll represent some type of challenge. And then on the return trip, you're of course going to have 2 more milestones so that when you get to your town, you're absolutely out of supplies. But that's okay because you're in civilization. You'll be able to get an inn or rest up for the night. When you're taking a journey from, let's say, one location to another one, and you don't know where you're going to go from that, that's going to be, let's say, we're going to go to this area and we're going to go ahead and stop and we'll see wherever we go from that. At that point there, I'm going to have 3 milestones. So the idea then is when you ever get to your location, you're going to be on low on provisions. Now this can be modified some depending on, where you're going. Let's say if you were going to go from one city to another city, you might want to figure, okay, I'm going to make that 4 milestones because as a GM, you'll figure when you get there, yeah, you're going to be out of provisions, but it'll still be an inn, or you can be able to rest or get some type of food or something like that. You can sort of play around with that. But generally I have, if we're going to go to this mountain range, and at that point we have no idea what's going to happen, we don't know what's going to go on, we're going to have 3 milestones. So at least you have some provisions, something that's going to be left over. Now, when you're out of provisions, you're going to get a level of fatigue. And that, of course, will have some type of game impact. So how do these checks work on these milestones? What happens? So when you reach a milestone, you're going to draw a card. If you draw an ace or a face card, it's going to represent some type of event happening. And that depends upon the suits. So for clubs, that means your provisions, they drop 1 level. And the idea then is that even though you're expecting to have enough provisions the last year of your journey, something happens, either some food spoilage, or something happens where you have to basically use more provisions than what you expected. If you get diamonds, then it's some sort of climate appropriate inclement weather that causes some issues with you. If you get hearts, then you're lost or off course. And typically what's going to happen is this is just going to add another milestone to the trip. And if this happens, then of course, this may impact the level of provisions that you have. And lastly, of course, you have is spades. And if this happens, then you have some type of hostile creatures or hostile guards or something of that sort that's going to indicate some sort of type of conflict that you're going to have. What happens when you need to make a check? Well, in the case for clubs, your provisions would drop down by 1 level. So you have to do a skill check. In typical cases, you're going to use a survival roll. But maybe you could possibly use a vigor check, something of that sort. And it gives a chance for the players to overcome this challenge or this obstacle. Same thing for diamonds. If you have some inclement weather on that aspect there, again, you can make some type of survival roll, something of that sort that you could maybe find shelter. You're going to be able to get through that challenge. Now, I want to say about spades, what's interesting with this is that you'll have some type of encounter with a hostile creature. So you want to say, you'll make a check, I would say like maybe with battle of knowledge skill or maybe some sort of tactical edge. And the idea there is that if you fail that, then you'll get ambushed. And so that can lead a point of, just having some combat, that goes in a point where you're just not on equal footing. Now what I do here is I have these different face cards. They're going to represent different times of the day. So Jack would be during the early day, Queen would be late day, King would be after dusk, and then the Ace might be before dawn. This can give you an idea of when this would happen during the day, and that can maybe help you play out how you want to run that combat, or maybe how that you can consider how they might want to avoid it, that kind of thing. What I like about using these card systems is that you can try to alter this somewhat, if you want, based upon maybe the type of terrain that you're in. So let's say if you're going through some desert dunes or something like that, and you figure, you know what, for sure, it's going to be really harsh conditions. I want to increase the likelihood that you're going to lose provisions, that you're going to have to try to require some type of survival roll or be able to live off the land and get the supplies that you need. I want to increase that chance that something bad's going to happen. In this case there, I want to expand that out and maybe have that, say, from a 5 through 10, then you can have a chance that provisions would drop. If you're in a swampy area, you figure, you know what, that's probably very easy for you to get lost. So I'm going to say, 5 through 10 in a swampy area, that will just increase the chances that you just sort of lose your bearings or, something of that sort. And likewise, you might figure like, you know what, I'm going to say the mountains of this area, it's full of goblins or orcs like that. So again, not only does spades of this a face card, but I'm going to say 5 through 10 in a spades, then you're going to encounter some type of battle with these type of creatures. So you can play around with that a little bit. And that's what I sort of like with that. I really enjoyed using the system a lot for my Dark Sun campaign. Especially travel is supposed to be really sort of a hindrance. It's supposed to be an epic type journey. The simple idea of this, using these markers that utilize a general abstract representation of your provisions. And of course, if you're out, then of course, you're going to suffer a level of exhaustion. And if you need to make a check where you need to have provisions and you don't have that, you could suffer more fatigue. And I love about this too is that you have a chance to have your players sort of counteract that and sort of try to utilize their survival skill or something like that. And I think that makes them feel a little bit more validated, having this type of choices. Now, I've also done this for 5th edition D&D, and I have a link of that in the comment section. And there, I played around with a little bit more, is relying more on the survival skill. And of course, maybe making certain constitution checks. And this can, again, be countered maybe with some certain spells. And, you just got to keep that in mind. But again, I feel like that's pretty cool. I think for a druid or something of the sort, they say, hey, I want to choose this spell slot. I want to make sure that I have this spell memorized to help us get through these things. So you have to make a check. Your provisions drop. They can say, well, I'm going to cast a spell just, to make sure that we have enough food for this leg in this journey. And you can say, okay, you counter that. And I think that that's all right. That's a fine way of handling it. I think it's good to encourage your players to sort of be a little bit clever. And if they want to branch out in their skills and try to do something outside of maybe your typical dungeon crawl and the skills that are be advantageous there, then try to reward them for that. So it's a short video today. I just want to highlight a system that I use for my travel in my games, especially for Savage Worlds. I think it's a great way to add a little bit of randomness to the game. And the idea too that, that importance of having provisions and being able to be well stocked. And of course, if you're out of this resource, then there's some sort of game effect that can impact, how you'll handle challenges once you're at that location. And I think that's sort of a fun system of working with that. And it's not too heavy with bookkeeping. It is pretty easy to implement. Anyways, Hope you like it and have some fun on your own tabletop using these rules.